Dear children, get ready for a great adventure full of magic and mystery, because now I'm going to tell you a story about a boy who discovered something extraordinary. In a small town, there lived a boy named Matthew. At first glance, he looked like an ordinary boy. He had messy hair, always carried a backpack full of books, and liked to draw maps of unknown worlds. But from a young age, he felt he was different. Sometimes, when he concentrated, he could feel the thoughts of the people around him, and when he closed his eyes, he could see strange flashes of light. One rainy evening, while playing in the attic of an old house, he found a strange hat under a layer of dust. It was dark blue with silver stars embroidered on it and looked like something out of a fairy tale. As soon as he put it on his head, he felt a slight tingling in his fingertips. Suddenly, everything began to swirl around him. The floor disappeared, the air rippled, and Matthew felt something invisible carry him away. Looking around, he found himself standing in front of a large stone gate that read, "Silver Oak School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." Matthias hadn't even had time to properly understand where he was when a tall man in a long cloak appeared before him. He had a long silver beard, keen eyes, and a staff carved from old wood in his hand. "Welcome, Matthew," he said in a deep voice. "My name is Master Zakar, and you are here because the power of magic slumbers within you. But before you become our pupil, you must pass the first test. To obtain the glittering stone that illuminates our school, only those with a pure heart and courage can find it." Matthias did not hesitate for a second. He wanted to find out what he could do. So he set off on his journey to the forgotten forest, where the stone was to be found. The forest was dark, silent, full of strange sounds. The trees swayed, even when the wind wasn't blowing, and whispers could be heard in the distance. Matthias was proceeding cautiously when suddenly he saw something among the bushes. It was Fira, the talking fox. It had orange fur and eyes that shone like two lanterns. "Watch out, Mate," she said urgently. "The dark shadows are trying to steal the stone. If they see you, they'll try to stop you." Matthew thanked the fox and continued on. When he finally reached the clearing, he saw a glowing stone the size of a fist in the middle. It glowed with a soft blue light, and Matthias felt that it was something special. But just as he reached it, black shadows began to appear around it. They had long arms, blank eyes, and were slowly approaching him. Matthias felt fear, but then he remembered Master Zakar's words, "The true magic is within you." He took a deep breath and instinctively reached out his hands to the stone. At that moment, a bright light spilled around him, reflecting the shadows. The stone lowered itself into his palm, and the shadows disappeared. Matthew ran back to the school where Master Zakar was waiting for him. "Great!" smiled the wise wizard. "Today you have proved that you are a true wizard. This is your first step on the road to great adventures." And so began Matthew's life of magic. The sun was just lazily rising over the rooftops of the School of Witchcraft and Wizardry when Matthias heard a knock on his room door. He rubbed his eyes and opened it. Master Zakar stood at the door, his gaze stern but kind. He was wearing a wizard's hat. "Matthew, time waits for no man. You have passed the first task, but there is another test ahead. This time, your journey will take you to the Lake of Hidden Depths," he spoke mysteriously. "Lake of the Hidden Deep?" Matthew repeated, sitting down on the bed. "I've never heard of it." "It's not on any map," Master Zakar nodded. It is deep in the forbidden forest. Its waters hold ancient power, but also many secrets. Your task is to fetch a drop of water without falling victim to its guardians. Matthias nodded, quickly dressed and grabbed his magic hat. As soon as he put it on, he whispered, "Hat, take me to the lake of hidden depths." The wind picked up, and the world around Matthew blurred. When the image settled again, he stood on the shore of the lake, its surface glistening like a black mirror. All around was a dense, misty forest and the distant hooting of owls. Mathieu approached the water and reached out his hand to scoop some into his palms. As soon as his fingers touched the surface, however, the water rippled and a tall figure with glowing blue eyes appeared before him. Her body was translucent, as if it were made of water itself. "Who is disturbing the waters of the hidden depths?" thundered the water spirit's voice. Matthew swallowed but tried to remain calm. "I am Matthew, and I need a drop of water for my test," he replied with determination. The spirit looked at him intently. "The water of the hidden deep is not for mere mortals. If you wish to obtain it, you must prove your wisdom. Answer me. Which is the strongest, fire, earth, air, or water?" Matthias pondered. Each of these elements had its great power. Fire burned everything in its path. The earth was solid and unwavering. Air was invisible, but it could tear down entire forests. And water? It could be as calm as the surface of a pond or as destructive as a stormy sea. Finally, he looked the spirit in the eye and said, "Water. It can extinguish fire, wash the earth, shape rocks, and even the air bends over it." The spirit smiled and beckoned him. "That's right, boy. You're wiser than I expected." Then he raised his hand, and a single drop of glowing water dripped from his fingers into a small silver vial. Matthew clasped it tightly in his palm and whispered with relief, "Hat, take me back." Again the wind swirled around him, and before he knew it, he was back in the great hall before Master Zakar. "Well done, Matthew," the wizard smiled. "You have completed the second task, but you must prepare for the last one. Will be the most difficult of all the tasks. But before you are worthy of this task, you must rest." Matthias felt his heart pounding excitedly. What would be his last task? Matthew woke up to a new day with the feeling that something big was waiting for him. And he wasn't wrong. No sooner had he rubbed his eyes than there was a knock on the door. "Come in," Matthew called. Master Zakar entered the room with a serious expression on his face. "Matthew, you have passed 2 tests and proved your courage and cleverness. Now the last task awaits you, the most difficult of all. You must pass through the labyrinth of endless doors and find your way out." "The labyrinth?" Matthew repeated in surprise. "Yes," Zakar nodded. "This labyrinth is full of doors. Some will lead you down the wrong path. Others may confuse you, but only one leads out. You must trust your intuition, your courage, and your hat." Matthew gripped the brim of his magic hat tightly. "All right," he muttered, and placed it firmly on his head. As he did so, the hat gently fluttered and glistened in the dim light. The wind around Matthew suddenly picked up, as if a hidden force had awakened. Suddenly, he felt something pulling him forward, or rather, drawing him in. The world spun around him, and in a split second, he found himself in front of a huge stone gate. Once, through the stone gate, he found himself in a strange corridor. It was illuminated by the dim light from lanterns, but there was no window anywhere to be seen. On either side were rows of doors, blue, red, green, high, low, some with handles, some without. There were hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of doors. Matthew hesitated. "I can never get through this," he whispered. Slowly, he reached out his hand to the door closest to him. It was red with a decorative keyhole. With a deep breath, he opened it. Behind them was another corridor, filled with even more doors. He tried another. This one blew with a brass handle. Again, another corridor, and another, and another. It went on and on. Matthew's head began to spin. He was trapped in an endless loop. "This is a bad dream," he muttered, leaning wearily against the wall. "There must be some way out." At that moment, he heard a low whisper. He put his ear to the wall. The door opposite him was whispering. "The right way is not visible to the eyes," came from them. Matthew hesitated. What did they mean? What if they were just more illusions? What if they were lost here forever? Suddenly, he remembered Master Zakhar's words. "Trust your hat." Matthew took off his hat and put it on the ground. "Hat, show me the right way." At first, nothing happened. Matthew concentrated and repeated, "Hat, show me the right way." Then the hat shook slightly, slowly turned, and started rolling. Matthew followed him, his heart pounding. The hat turned right, then left, then ran past a strange door covered in silver. And then he stopped at a perfectly ordinary old wooden door, covered in cobwebs. "Is that it?" Matthew whispered. "This door looks so ordinary, surely no one has opened it for a long time." Slowly, he put his hand on the handle. He hesitated for a second. What if it leads him into another trap? He took a deep breath and pressed the handle. The door opened with a soft creak, and a clear exit from the labyrinth appeared in front of Matthew. Matthew stepped forward, and suddenly he was back in front of Master Zakhar. He was out. The master smiled. "Matthew, you have passed all 3 tests. You have shown strength, wisdom, and wit. You are ready to become a true magician." Matthew beamed with joy. He had succeeded. But before he could say thank you, Zakhar added cryptically, "And now your real adventure is about to begin." What did he mean? Matthew didn't know. But one thing was certain. This was just the beginning of his magical journey, full of the greatest adventures. Matthew stood in front of the high gate of the School of Magic and Sorcery. He was officially accepted. He could finally begin his real studies of magic. Everything around him seemed mysterious. The tall towers of the school disappeared in the mist. Luminous spheres flew through the air, whispering unintelligible formulas. And in the distance, a strange creaking could be heard, as if doors were opening and closing by themselves. No sooner had he passed through the great corridor lined with glittering torches than a low but confident voice behind him said, "You are Matthew, are you not?" He turned to see a girl with darker hair braided into a single long braid. She had blue-green eyes, a high forehead, and slightly raised eyebrows, as if she had just been scrutinizing him. She was wearing the same school gown as him. "Yes, that's me. And you?" he replied curiously. "I'm Agnes. I just started here, and it seems we're classmates," she said excitedly. "I heard you passed the 3 hardest assignments. That must have been amazing." Matthew sighed. "Well, it was rather scary, but I made it through because I had to, and thanks to my magic hat." Agnes folded her arms across her chest. "Your hat? That's the famous mystery hat, isn't it? Wow, I'd like to see that. At most, my hat made my hair so messy when I first put it on." Matthew smiled. "Mine sometimes does things I'd rather not expect, too." At that moment, their conversation was interrupted. The school bell sounded like a thunderclap through the hallway. "First period is starting," Agnes exclaimed, grabbing Matthew's hand. "Hurry, don't be late. If the teacher turns us into frogs on the first day, I won't take the blame." Together, they ran into a large classroom with high windows and desks full of strange bottles, parchments, and magic books. There was a faint whiff of sulfur and lavender in the air, a strange combination indeed. On the dais stood a teacher, a tall, serious man in dark blue robes, with a look so stern it could probably shatter a rock. "Welcome, new students," he spoke in a deep voice. "Today you will try your first spell." Matthew and Agnes looked at each other. They were full of anticipation. "Get ready. Today we will learn how to light a flame with a single movement of the hand." Matthew swallowed. "This is going to be interesting." "Don't worry," Agnes whispered, smiling and patting the sleeve of her cloak. "I accidentally set the carpet on fire at home when I tried the candle lighting by thought trick. Only it wasn't a candle, and it wasn't a thought, it was a sneeze." Matthew burst out laughing, but quickly controlled himself when the teacher looked at him. "First, concentrate. Imagine a small flame in your palm." Matthew raised his hand and concentrated. He imagined a small, harmless fire. He felt a faint tingling on his fingertips. Next to him, Agnes hummed a tune softly. Suddenly there was a pop. Matthew rolled his eyes. His palm was empty, but Agnes's sleeve was burning with blue flame. "Well, I didn't plan this," said Agnes, and started waving her hand furiously, which of course didn't help at all. The teacher just waved his hand and the flame went out. "Concentration is the key," he said sternly, "and above all, don't grumble when casting spells." Agnes grimaced. So that was the mistake. Matthew looked at her and realized that he had just met someone who would not only be his friend, but possibly his partner in all the magical trouble that awaited them at this school. After a few more attempts and one other minor fire incident, they finally learned to create a small, controlled flame. Matthew watched in fascination as the little spark of light danced in his palm, while Agnes excitedly admired her own little flame, this time right where it was supposed to be. "So, still worried you can't do magic?" Agnes nudged him with her elbow. Matthew smiled. "A little, but I think it'll be a lot more fun with you by my side." Agnes nodded in agreement. "Definitely, and who knows, maybe one day we'll be true masters of magic." Matthew laughed. If this kept up, they'd be masters of unexpected mischief. But why not? That's part of wizarding school, after all. Matthew was slowly getting used to life at the School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Every day was full of new discoveries. The magic classroom, the secret passages, the strange creatures in the woods behind the school, and of course the classes where they learned to master magic. It didn't always go smoothly, but with Agnes by their side, it was mostly fun. Today was their first potions lesson. The classroom was large, filled with shelves of strange bottles, bundles of dried herbs, and jars of things Matthew preferred not to name. A mixture of smells hung in the air that reminded him of burnt toast mixed with mushroom soup and a little spoiled milk. "Today we will prepare a basic mixture to strengthen your memory," the professor announced in a stern voice. "Be careful. One wrong move and it could end up, well, let's just say unpleasant." Matthew and Agnes exchanged amused glances and set to work. Agnes stirred the cauldron exactly as instructed, while Matthew crushed dried dragon clover leaves. "Well, well, well," came a haughty voice behind them. "Now this is definitely going to be a master potion." They both turned to see a girl with blonde hair pulled tightly into a neat bun. Her dark blue cloak was immaculate, and she had an amused smirk on her lips. "Kate," Agnes whispered so that only Matthew could hear, "she thinks she's the best in the world." Kate folded her arms across her chest. "Maybe you should add a few more ingredients. Maybe some viper's egg?" Agnes frowned. "Viper weed? That would ruin the potion." Kate smiled falsely. "Exactly, but you probably won't get away with it anyway." Matthew pursed his lips. He didn't like being mocked. "How about you show us your potion?" Kate grinned and stepped aside. Her cauldron contained a perfectly clear blue liquid that glistened like a gem. "Right out of the book," Kate uttered with false modesty. "We can do it too," Matthew said, turning back to his cauldron. He and Agnes had worked carefully and precisely, but even so, their potion looked more like melted muddy mush. Kate laughed. "Well, good luck with that. You'll need it." Matthew was about to reply when suddenly Agnes stopped. She leaned closer to their cauldron and whispered, "Mathieu, our potion is bubbling more than before." Matthew looked inside and frowned. Indeed, the mixture had begun to darken and hiss strangely. That shouldn't have been right. "Something's wrong," he muttered. Then he noticed Kate looking subtly in their direction with an expression Mathieu didn't like one bit. Suddenly, the cauldron roared violently and there was a loud crack. Matthew and Agnes jumped as a cloud of purple smoke blew out of the cauldron and into their faces. When the smoke disappeared, Matthew saw Agnes with strangely shiny purple hair. "What the hell?" Agnes exclaimed, feeling her head. Kate laughed all the way round. "Wow, now that's what I call the attempt of the century. Great job, Agnes. Your new haircut looks great on you." Agnes pulled her hat off her head angrily. "We didn't do this. Someone put something in our potion." Matthew remembered how Kate had been hanging around their bench a moment ago and narrowed his eyes. "You threw something in there, didn't you?" Kate shrugged indifferently and said, "Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. If you can't do something, you can't blame others." Matthew clenched his fists, but at that moment the professor appeared above them. She smelled Kate's potion and nodded in recognition. "Well done, Miss Kate. Just as the recipe says, just the right consistency and color. 10 points for your team," she praised her. Kate smiled smugly and looked meaningfully at Matthew and Agnes. Matthew had a hard time not to say something. It was clear to him that Kate had cheated, but to prove it, that would be harder than preparing the damn potion correctly. The professor then walked over to their desk and looked critically into their cauldron. Meanwhile, the liquid inside had settled to a strange purple color and was still bubbling slightly. She took another breath and after a moment of silence, nodded her head. "Well, it still needs a little tweaking," she said sternly, "but the effort is worth it." Matthew and Agnes looked at each other. Effort? Was that all? The fact that Agnes's hair was now shining like amethyst didn't bother anyone? "But, Professor, Agnes began, but the teacher stopped her with a look. "In potions class, we focus on results. Mistakes are part of learning," the professor spoke in an impersonal tone. "Be more careful and attentive next time." Kate smiled contentedly and rolled up her sleeve significantly. Matthew noticed that a few tiny grains of some powder remained on her nail. He'd bet it was something she'd mixed into their potion. "Now this is going to be an interesting year," sighed Agnes, frowning as she looked at her purple hair. Matthew looked at her and nodded. They might not be the best right away, but they wouldn't give up. And they'll show Kate that they're no beginners. When they left the classroom, Agnes thoughtfully adjusted her wizarding cloak. "You know, Matthew, we can't have her doing this to us all the time." Matthew thought for a moment and then smiled. "No, we can't. So what if we're ready for her next time?" Agnes looked up at him, and a slow smile appeared on her lips. "I like the way you think." Purple smoke may have billowed from their cauldron, and Agnes had an amethyst veil for hair. But one thing Matthew knew for sure. This was just the beginning. And if Kate wanted to play this game, so be it, because the two of them were determined to win it. Matthew already felt at home in the school of magic and spells. Every day was full of new spells, potions, and surprises. Together with Agnes, they formed an inseparable pair. Even if something went wrong, they always managed to laugh and get along somehow. But this evening was going to be different. Something special was in the air. It was long past curfew. The whole school was immersed in silence, with only the occasional crackle of wood in the fireplace in the distance, or the floor creaking under the footsteps of the night watchman. Matthew was sitting on his bed, stretching and about to blow out the candle when he noticed something strange. He placed his wizard's hat on the table beside the bed and noticed that the cloth on the brim of it fluttered faintly. What was that? He muttered to himself, squinting his eyes. He reached out and gently ran his finger over the embroidered silver stars. At that moment, for a split second, the hat glowed slightly. It wasn't very visible, just a fleeting glimmer, like the moon illuminating the waves on the surface of a lake. Matthew's heart skipped a beat. That had never happened before. He turned his hat over and began to examine it carefully. And then, inside, on the cloth lining, he saw a barely visible inscription. The words were so old that they almost blended into the fabric. The next morning, Matthew could think of nothing else. No sooner had the school bell rung for first period than he pulled Agnes aside. "You must see something," he whispered, pulling out his hat. Agnes ran her fingers over the inscription. "That's weird. Almost invisible." "Exactly. And look, if I look at it from a different angle, it looks like there are words there, only they can't be read." Agnes's eyes flashed. "I have an idea. Let's go to the library." Together they ran down the long corridor to the huge doors of the school library. Inside, it smelled of old paper and ink. "We have to find a spell to reveal hidden texts," Agnes decided, and began flipping through a thick book on ancient spells. After a while she exclaimed, "I've got it! Just a simple revealing spell." She opened the book and read the incantation. As she spoke the last word, the writing inside the hat began to brighten until it was perfectly legible. "Matthew, this hat belonged to your great-great-grandfather. It hides a secret that you may only discover if you are ready for it. Follow the signs." Matthew's eyes bugged out. "My great-great-grandfather? But I don't know of any wizards in the family," Agnes mused. Maybe they tried to keep it a secret, or maybe it was forgotten. Either way, this means the hat is hiding something important. Matthew carefully put the hat back on his head and thought. Suddenly, a strange thought flashed through his mind, as if something was pulling him toward something invisible. He reached inside the hat and felt the fabric. And then he felt it. Something was there. He pulled gently on the brim of the lining, and his heart raced. Inside was a hidden pocket, and in it a folded parchment. With trembling hands, he unfolded it. There were strange symbols on it. Agnes leaned closer. "That looks like a map," she gasped. The map was old and covered with mysterious markings, and it led somewhere deep under the school. "I know this place." Agnes frowned, pointing to a point on the map. "That's the entrance to the underground, but no one goes there. They say there's something guarding the way." "Do you think there really is something there?" asked Matthew. Agnes shrugged. "The only way to find out is to go there." Matthew swallowed. He'd gotten into trouble a few times before because of his curiosity, but this time it was different. This wasn't just an adventure trip, it was personal. The hat hadn't just fallen into his hands. Suddenly, the air around them rippled slightly, and Matthew felt a strange sensation, as if something was calling to him. He looked at Agnes and saw that she felt it too. "Whatever's waiting down there, I think it has something to do with you," Agnes said softly. Matthew took a deep breath and gripped the brim of his hat tightly. "Here we go." At that moment, the map in his hand glowed slightly, and the tiny symbols began to move, as if guided by the path itself. Cautiously, they made their way towards the hidden entrance to the underground, where the answer to their final question awaited them. And perhaps a brand new beginning. Children, if you liked the story, thank you so much for being a layman and subscribing to my fairy tale channel.